7 identical headstones, each bearing the Murphy name. Every son, dead at 21. For 36 years, a dark curse clung to one lineage. Authorities stopped investigating. Records sealed. This truth you were never meant to hear. In the rolling, scarred hills of western Pennsylvania, where the insatiable maw of coal mines carved deep, dark scars into the very earth, there exists a cemetery plot, a place of unnatural stillness that has haunted historians for over a century. 7 identical headstones stand in grim, perfect formation, a terrifying testament to a family's doom. Each bears the surname Murphy. Each marks the grave of a young man who met his end at the exact, chilling age of 21. Between 1847 and 1883, every single male heir born into the Murphy lineage met his end on his 21st birthday. Their deaths, though tragically unique in their immediate circumstances, possessed an eerie statistical consistency. They were not random acts of fate. Local authorities, baffled, overwhelmed, eventually ceased their investigations, unable to explain the macabre pattern. The Pennsylvania State Archives, repositories of public record, hold over 300 pages of testimonies, medical reports, and witness statements related to these deaths. Documents so profoundly unsettling, they were sealed by order of the state government in 1884, only to be quietly transferred to a restricted vault in Harrisburg, a deliberate act of suppression. What you are about to hear has never been told in its horrifying entirety. It has been painstakingly pieced together from recently discovered family letters, fragments of court records, and the tormented personal diary of Dr. Ezra Caldwell, the physician who witnessed 4 of these deaths and spent his final years obsessively documenting what he could only describe as the Murphy curse. The truth about what happened to the Murphy ends is far more disturbing than any supernatural explanation could ever be. It is rooted in the harsh realities of 19th-century industrial America, family secrets spanning generations, and a vast conspiracy of silence that protected the powerful while systematically destroying the innocent. The year was 1846. The American dream, a flickering beacon for the desperate and the hopeful, drew millions across the vast, unforgiving Atlantic. Among them, Seamus Murphy, an Irish immigrant, his very being forged in the crucible of the Great Famine. He arrived in Milfield, Pennsylvania, a burgeoning coal mining town nestled deep within the shadowed folds of the Appalachian foothills, some 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Like thousands of his countrymen, Seamus carried little more than calloused hands, an iron will, and a fervent, almost desperate dream of prosperity in this new world. But Seamus Murphy was not like most refugees. He possessed something else, something that would prove to be both a monumental blessing and a profound, inescapable curse. A letter of introduction, a seemingly innocuous piece of paper from a mysterious benefactor back in Ireland, a figure whose identity remains shrouded in the mists of history. This letter, a key to a door he couldn't yet comprehend, had meticulously arranged his passage across the ocean and, more importantly, guaranteed him employment with the monolithic Keystone Coal and Iron Company. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an entry point, a direct pathway into the dark heart of America's burgeoning industrial might, a system that promised security but demanded a terrifying price. Seamus, in his desperate hope, stepped unknowingly into a pact, the true cost of which would only be revealed across generations, marked by a chilling, rhythmic toll of young lives. Milfield, Pennsylvania, was not merely a town. It was an extension of the Keystone Coal and Iron Company itself, a corporate creation, a sealed world where every aspect of life was dictated by the unyielding hand of corporate decree. Its dusty streets, lined with identical wooden houses painted a uniform, unyielding grey, spoke of a manufactured order, a landscape of enforced efficiency. The very air vibrated with the ceaseless hum of Keystone's massive operation, a sprawling network of mines that honeycombed the surrounding mountains, employing over 800 men. The entire economy, the very breath of Milfield, depended solely on the company's insatiable hunger for coal. Keystone owned everything, From the general store where wages paid in company script were swiftly reclaimed, to the very pews of the church where men prayed for salvation, to the schoolhouse where their children were educated, to the cemetery plots where their worn bodies would eventually rest. Every aspect of existence was meticulously controlled, designed to bind its inhabitants in a perpetual cycle of labor and debt. Even the town's name was a corporate invention. Originally Greenvale, a name that spoke of natural beauty, it had been ruthlessly rechristened Milfield by Keystone, a stark reflection of their vision of cold industrial efficiency overriding all natural beauty. But what truly set Milfield apart, what elevated its control to an insidious art, was the deliberate selection of its workforce. This was no random influx of desperate immigrants. Keystone had developed a sophisticated, chillingly precise recruitment system. They targeted specific families from specific regions of Europe, particularly those shattered souls fleeing political upheaval or economic disaster. These families arrived not as random immigrants, but as carefully chosen participants in what company documents mystically called the settlement program, a comprehensive system of housing, employment, and community development. It promised security, but demanded in return a long-term commitment. A commitment that, for some, would stretch beyond life itself. Seamus Murphy, at 28, arrived in Milfield bearing the indelible marks of hardship etched onto his weathered face, a testament to the unseen struggles that had driven him across the vast, indifferent Atlantic. Yet, he possessed an acuity, a set of skills that transcended the raw physical strength of most new arrivals. He harbored a sharp, discerning mind for numbers, a talent for meticulous calculation, coupled with an unusual proficiency in both English and Gaelic. It was this rare combination of intellect and literacy that swiftly caught the predatory eye of Josiah Bentley, Keystone's formidable operations manager. Bentley was a man cast from a different, colder mold. Thin, calculating, in his 40s, he had, through his own ruthless ambition, transformed Milfield from a struggling mining camp into one of the most brutally profitable operations in all of Pennsylvania. His methods, which he euphemistically termed innovative labor management techniques, were a chilling testament to his psychological grasp over the workforce. Within Seamus's very first month, a rapid, almost unheard-of promotion ripped him from the dark, suffocating depths of the mines. He was elevated directly to the sterile confines of the company's accounting office. This move, seemingly a blessing, a swift ascent above the grinding poverty of most immigrants, was in truth a carefully orchestrated placement. It positioned Seamus Murphy precisely where he would, unknowingly, witness the true, horrifying scope of Keystone's iron-fisted control over its workers. He was now an insider, granted access to the meticulously kept ledgers, books that contained not just figures, but the very essence of human control. Within the confines of that dust-choked office, amidst ledgers thick with the gritty residue of coal and the oppressive weight of other people's meticulously documented secrets, Seamus Murphy came to grasp the true, horrifying scope of Keystone's dominion. The ledgers he now maintained were not mere payroll records. They were the chilling blueprints of psychological control. These were books that tracked every conceivable aspect of the employees' lives, from the spiraling debts they accumulated at the company store to their dutiful attendance at company-sponsored church services. From their children's performance in the company school to disturbingly detailed notes about their political opinions and even their most private social associations. It was a comprehensive, insidious dossier on every soul trapped within Milfield's carefully constructed reality. It was in this very office, amidst this suffocating weight of enforced transparency, that Seamus met Margaret O'Connell. She was the daughter of Dermot O'Connell, one of the first Irish families ensnared by the settlement program, and she worked as a seamstress for the wives of company supervisors, a position that granted her unique access to the quiet whispers and unspoken truths of Milfield's upper echelons. Margaret possessed an education strikingly unusual for a woman of her background. She could read Latin as fluently as English, having been taught by nuns in Ireland. This intellectual sharpness, honed by observation, had instilled in her a profound, almost instinctive eye for the inconsistencies and chilling mysteries that permeated life in Milfield. Their courtship was brief, passionate, born partly from a genuine, undeniable affection that bloomed in the shadows, but also from a shared, unspoken understanding. Both sensed that their individual survival, their very ability to navigate Milfield's complex, ruthless social hierarchy, would be amplified by their union. They wed in the fall of 1846 in the town's modest Catholic church, a ceremony attended by over 200 souls. The officiant, Father McKenna, delivered sermons that, with chilling consistency, emphasized the virtues of loyalty, obedience, and the solemn acceptance of one's appointed place in God's vast, unyielding plan, a subtle yet potent form of institutional manipulation, reinforcing the very chains that bound the community. Margaret, with her raven-black hair and storm-cloud eyes, was a beauty, but more crucially for Seamus, she possessed a fierce intelligence and shared his growing, terrifying unease about the true nature of their supposed good fortune. They were bound by more than just love. They were bound by a shared secret and a dawning understanding of their prison. Their honeymoon cottage on Elm Street, a seemingly generous allocation for an Irish family, a symbol of their ascent within Milfield's rigid hierarchy, was, in truth, another carefully constructed cage. It came with unspoken rules, invisible chains dictating when they could come and go, who they were permitted to entertain, and, most insidiously, what topics were deemed appropriate for discussion within walls they gradually, chillingly realized were never truly private. Their supposed sanctuary was under constant surveillance, a vital component of the corporate psychological control system. By the spring of 1847, Margaret was pregnant with their first child, a promise of future generations. But the pregnancy was difficult, not just physically. Her body racked with severe morning sickness that stretched into her second trimester, but psychically. More troubling, far more ominous, were the strange dreams that began to plague her sleep. Visions, haunting, vivid landscapes of despair. She recounted standing in a vast, desolate cemetery, its expanse filled with rows upon rows of identical headstones. Each bore the name of a young man she had never met, yet somehow, with a chilling certainty, she recognized them. Their fates were somehow intertwined with hers. Dr. Caldwell, the town's sole physician, a man whose medical training was honed by years of observing the peculiar, unsettling patterns of illness and death that afflicted Milfield's workers, prescribed bed rest and laudanum for Margaret's discomfort. But in the sacred solitude of his private journal, Dr. Caldwell committed a terrifying observation to paper. He had witnessed these exact symptoms, these chilling prophetic dreams, in other pregnant women whose husbands held positions of responsibility within the company. This was no isolated incident. This was a pattern, a symptom of a deeper, unspoken pact, a sinister echo of a debt being called in, a price that transcended currency. Milfield, Pennsylvania was not merely a company town, it was a powder keg, its surface calm belying a volatile network of tensions that ran far deeper than the typical conflicts between disparate ethnic groups. The Irish Catholics, like the Murphy family, faced the constant, grating sting of discrimination from the Protestant German and English families who had arrived earlier, carving their own uneasy niche in the company town. But beneath these social frictions, a far more oppressive reality bound every soul in Milfield. All workers, regardless of their origin, lived under the constant, suffocating threat of the mines themselves, of sudden cave-ins, of devastating explosions, and, more insidiously, under the company's absolute iron-fisted control over every single aspect of their lives. Wages, paid not in real currency but in company script, ensured a perpetual cycle of debt. This script, redeemable only at company stores, became an invisible chain binding families to Keystone in a never-ending cycle of consumption and obligation, keeping them perpetually tethered to the very hand that fed them. But far more insidious was the meticulously crafted system of social advancement. It was a psychological control mechanism, rewarding absolute cooperation, punishing even the slightest flicker of independence. Union organizers, those brave few who dared to penetrate Milfield's sealed world, were met not with negotiation, but with swift, brutal violence. More than one agitator, a voice of dissent, had simply vanished into the surrounding silent forests, never to be seen again. Their absence, a chilling warning etched into the collective memory. And then there were the stories. Whispers carried on the wind through the Irish sections of town, tales of families who, driven by a desperate longing for freedom, had attempted to escape Milfield's suffocating embrace. Their departures were mysteriously, inexplicably blocked by sudden legal complications, by crippling financial emergencies that magically appeared, making it utterly impossible for them to honor their manufactured debts to the company. This was the terrifying backdrop of industrial exploitation and hidden coercion against which the Murphy family would experience their first devastating tragedy. A relentless tightening of the invisible noose, revealing the true, horrific cost of the prosperity Keystone had so grandly promised its carefully selected workforce. The debt, it seemed, was already being called in. It was against this suffocating backdrop of industrial exploitation and hidden coercion that the Murphy family would experience their first devastating tragedy, a tragedy that would tear open the meticulously woven fabric of Keystone's promises, revealing the true horrific cost of the prosperity it offered its carefully selected workforce. The baby Margaret carried, a new life blossoming amidst the shadows of corporate dominion, would be born healthy and strong. A son. They named him Patrick, after Seamus's own father, a beacon of hope in the often bleak landscape of Milfield. But from the very moment of his birth, Patrick Murphy was marked. Marked by a fate that had been determined not by chance, nor by the whims of fortune, but by a malevolent design conceived long before his parents ever set foot on Pennsylvania soil. A chilling destiny woven into the very fabric of their good fortune that would claim not only his life, but the lives of every single male heir that would follow in the decades to come. A generational curse, an unholy pact sealed in the silent depths of Milfield. Patrick Murphy's 21st birthday dawned cold and grey on March 15, 1868. Snow still clung stubbornly to the scarred mountains surrounding Milfield, and the morning air carried the acrid, metallic tang of cold smoke, a smell that always preceded a storm, a scent that now mingled with the acrid scent of dread, a day that promised celebration, but would deliver only the chilling fulfillment of an inherited doom. The curse, long dormant, was about to claim its first victim. Seamus Murphy had meticulously planned a small celebration for his eldest son, a brief respite from the relentless grind of Milfield life, to be held at McBride's Tavern, one of the few establishments in town that begrudgingly welcomed Irish Catholics. But as Patrick dressed for work on the cold, grey morning of his 21st birthday, an unnatural quiet clung to him. Margaret, her maternal intuition a cold knot of dread, noticed the unusual pallor of his complexion. He sat at their kitchen table, barely touching the hearty breakfast she had lovingly prepared, his usual vibrant energy conspicuously absent. "You're looking peaked, my boy," she said, her palm pressing against his forehead, feeling the subtle heat beneath. "Perhaps you should stay home today." But Patrick Murphy, a young man who had inherited his father's unyielding, stubborn streak along with his dark Irish features, insisted he felt fine. He had recently achieved a significant promotion, elevated to shift supervisor in the mine's deepest, most treacherous tunnel. It was a position that came with both increased responsibility and the relentless, unforgiving scrutiny of the company bosses. Missing work on his birthday, he knew, would raise uncomfortable questions he simply couldn't afford to answer in Keystone's sealed world. The morning shift began at 6 sharp. The miners, a grim procession, gathering in the lamp house to collect their safety equipment before descending into the unforgiving maw of the earth. Patrick's crew consisted of 12 men, most of them Irish, a few German immigrants grudgingly accepted into their ranks. Their destination, Shaft 7, nearly 400 feet below ground. Its coal seam was notoriously rich and terrifyingly unstable, a perfect stage for a predetermined fate. The morning shift in Shaft 7 began like any other, a grim descent into the Earth's unforgiving maw. Patrick's crew, 12 men bound by shared toil and the constant threat of the depths, worked in the flickering lamplight, oblivious to the clock ticking towards an unseen appointment with fate. Then, precisely at 2:17 in the afternoon, according to the company's chillingly precise official incident report, it happened. A methane gas explosion. It tore through Shaft 7 with a devastating contained force, a calculated detonation. The concussive blast resonated throughout Milfield, rattling windows, sending women, their faces stark white with terror, running into the streets, their screams swallowed by the acrid air. Mine explosions were a grim reality of the era, common enough to be an accepted horror. But this one was different, more precise, more contained than the random, chaotic accidents that periodically claimed miners' lives. When the rescue crews, their faces grimed with fear and coal dust, finally reached the affected area 3 hours later, they found 11 men unconscious but miraculously alive. Their bodies, hurled against the tunnel walls by the blast's unseen hand, bore the marks of violent impact. But Patrick Murphy was found at the exact, horrifying center of the blast site. His body, utterly unmarked by fire or debris, lay peacefully, as if he had simply laid down to rest. Dr. Caldwell, among the first to examine the scene, would later commit his profound disquiet to his private journal. Patrick, he wrote, appeared to have died not from the explosion itself, but from what he clinically described as a cessation of vital functions, occurring at the precise moment of the blast, a death by command. The other miners, when consciousness grudgingly returned, all recounted the same strange, impossible story. They had been working normally when Patrick, mid-bird conversation, suddenly stopped, looked at his pocket watch, and smiled. "Time's up," he had said, his voice calm, utterly devoid of fear, though none of them understood his meaning. Seconds later, the explosion had torn through their section of the mine. A debt collected, a curse revealed. The first payment was made. The terror of Patrick Murphy's death resonated with a chilling precision, but what followed peeled back another layer of the unspeakable truth. 3 days after the blast that claimed only him, a letter was discovered tucked into the pocket of his coat. A letter penned in his own hand, yet dated a full 2 weeks earlier. Within its pages, Patrick had meticulously laid out detailed instructions for his own burial, a chillingly calm premonition of his demise. It included a precise list of personal effects to be distributed among his siblings, and at the bottom, in his characteristic, careful script, a phrase that would forever haunt the Murphy lineage, a direct, undeniable confirmation of the curse. The first payment is made, followed by the chilling pronouncement, "The debt continues with my brothers." The company investigation, a predictable exercise in corporate damage control, swiftly concluded that Patrick had somehow triggered the explosion through negligence. A convenient lie. They offered no explanation for how a single man could cause such devastation in a contained area, nor why he alone perished while his entire crew survived. Keystone Coal and Iron, ever efficient in controlling narratives, paid a modest settlement to the grieving Murphy family, a paltry sum to buy their silence. They immediately ordered the incident report sealed, citing sensitivity to ongoing mining operations, a thin veil disguising a far more sinister truth. But Dr. Caldwell, the town's physician, a man haunted by the escalating anomalies he witnessed, quietly kept his own records. His growing suspicions about the true nature of Patrick's death would prove chillingly prophetic. For exactly 5 years later, to the day, the second Murphy son would meet his own terrifying appointment with fate, a debt collected with clockwork precision, marking another life claimed by the unbreakable curse. The pattern was set, the dark legacy cemented. The death of Patrick Murphy cast a long, suffocating shadow over the family, a chilling testament to the curse now irrevocably woven into their lineage. Grief, however, possesses a peculiar, insidious way of dulling even the sharpest edges of mystery, of numbing the soul to the gnawing questions. Life in Milfield, relentless in its demands, continued with its familiar, grinding rhythms of work and mere survival. Seamus, the patriarch, plunged himself into his duties at the company office with a renewed, almost frantic vigor, as if the meticulously kept ledger books and endless inventory reports could somehow shield him from the spectral questions that haunted his nights, from the truth he dared not confront. Margaret, his wife, bore the heaviest burden. In the agonizing months following Patrick's funeral, she seemed to age a decade. Her once luminous hair, a raven-black curtain of strength, was now streaked with premature grey, each silver thread a testament to unspoken sorrow. Her storm-cloud eyes, once sharp with intellect, often drifted, distant and unfocused, lost in the torment of her own private abyss. But it was their second son, Thomas, who seemed most profoundly affected by his older brother's chilling demise. Where Patrick had embodied a quiet seriousness, a resigned responsibility, Thomas possessed a restless, almost reckless streak that filled his parents with a new, colder fear. He had inherited his mother's formidable intelligence, a sharp, probing mind that yearned for answers. But he lacked Patrick's steady, accepting temperament. Thomas often found himself in direct conflict with the company supervisors, his defiant spirit refusing to bend. He questioned orders. He openly defended his fellow workers against unfair treatment. He was a force of inconvenient truth in a system built on unquestioning obedience, and this rebellious spirit, this innate need to challenge the established order, would lead him directly into the heart of the curse that now stalked his family. In the years that followed Patrick's death, a grim determination took root in Thomas Murphy. Where his father retreated into the false solace of ledgers, Thomas embarked on a relentless quest for truth. He began asking uncomfortable questions, questions that rippled beyond the surface of accepted tragedy, directly challenging the official narrative of the Shaft 7 explosion. He haunted the town's small, dusty library, poring over brittle mining safety reports, devouring newspaper accounts of similar incidents, searching for a pattern, a hidden truth. He sought out the surviving miners from his brother's crew, men whose faces were etched with the memory of the blast, most of whom had long since fled Milfield, unwilling to ever return to the depths after what they had experienced. What Thomas unearthed in his relentless pursuit disturbed him to his very core. Mining records, meticulously kept yet deliberately obscured, revealed a chilling reality. Shaft 7, the very tunnel that had claimed his brother, had been deemed profoundly unsafe by previous inspections. Dangerous, volatile levels of methane gas had been detected in the weeks leading up to the explosion. This was not a random tragedy. More troubling still, Thomas discovered that Patrick, despite strict company policy prohibiting such overtime in hazardous areas, had been specifically asked to work a double shift on the day of his death, a deliberate exposure. But the most damning, most soul-searing revelation came with the discovery of a letter, buried among his father's papers, written in the cold, precise hand of Josiah Bentley himself. An explicit order, demanding Patrick conduct a special inspection of the tunnel's volatile gas pockets on his birthday. The truth, long suppressed, screamed from the very paper. Patrick's death was no accident. It was a calculated murder, orchestrated by the company that controlled their very lives. Armed with the damning proof of Bentley's letter, Thomas Murphy confronted his father. The confrontation, intended to unearth a hidden truth, instead revealed another layer of terrifying concealment. Seamus's reaction was swift, violent. The quiet, bookish man, who had meticulously cultivated a reputation for honesty and reliability, transformed before his son's eyes into a stranger consumed by a primal fury. His face flushed with rage, he snatched the incriminating document from Thomas's hands and, without a word, hurled it into the hungry flames of the hearth. "Some secrets are better left buried, boy," Seamus rasped, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a menace that chilled Thomas to the bone. "Your brother is dead, and no amount of digging will bring him back. Drop this foolishness before you join him." It was a threat, a dire warning delivered from a father who had clearly become an active participant in the very conspiracy Thomas sought to expose. But Thomas, now a young man approaching his own ominous 20th birthday, refused to let the matter rest. His father's violence only fueled his desperate quest. He began meeting secretly with former Keystone employees, men who had vanished from the company under a cloud of suspicion, their lives irrevocably altered by their proximity to Milfield's dark heart. What they revealed painted a picture of corruption and conspiracy that stretched far beyond a simple mining accident. It was a vast, intricate web of deceit and death, woven into the very fabric of the company town. A truth that promised not just understanding, but ultimate danger. The former Keystone employees, men whose lives had been irrevocably scarred by their proximity to the company's dark heart, revealed a truth far more terrifying than mere corporate negligence. They painted a sprawling, grim canvas of corruption and conspiracy, reaching into the highest echelons of power. There were chilling, verified stories of union organizers, brave men who dared to challenge the company's iron fist, meeting sudden, fatal accidents after getting too close to exposing egregious safety violations. Whistleblowers, those who sought to bring light to the darkness, had simply vanished into the vast, indifferent Pennsylvania wilderness, never to be seen again, their voices swallowed by the silence. And then, the true horror. The unspoken secret, whispered in the hushed tones of the Irish sections of town, finally laid bare. A secret agreement, a covenant woven between Keystone Coal and Iron and certain prominent, untouchable families in the region. A pact designed to ensure perpetually profitable operations, secured at any cost. But what resonated most profoundly, what sent a shiver of pure, unadulterated dread down Thomas's spine, were the tales that older miners, their faces etched with unspoken terror, referred to as blood contracts. These were not mere employment agreements. These were ancient, insidious covenants, forged decades earlier, binding certain families to the company in ways that transcended simple labor. These contracts, according to the chilling whispers, demanded specific forms of payment, a terrifying toll that could only be satisfied through death. And the payments, a macabre ritual of corporate dominion, came due with a horrifying clockwork precision, always on significant birthdays, always inexorably targeting the young men, the very sons who might otherwise carry on their family names, challenge the established order, or uncove the monstrous truth behind Keystone's reign. The curse was real, and it was a meticulously enforced corporate policy, as Thomas's own 21st birthday, a date now imbued with a terrifying, preordained dread, loomed closer in the spring of 1873. The weight of the revelation began to crush him. He transformed. The defiant truth-seeker became increasingly paranoid, profoundly erratic. The casual confidence that once marked his every step was replaced by a gnawing, all-consuming fear. He began carrying a pistol, a cold, ineffective comfort against an unseen enemy. He refused to work alone, insisting with a desperate certainty that someone, some unseen entity, was constantly following him through the dusty streets of Milfield. He was being watched, he was being hunted, and he knew it. His mother, Margaret, discovered him one morning, standing rigid at his bedroom window, fully dressed, despite the early hour, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky with an expression of profound, soul-wearying sadness. "They're coming for me, Ma," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Just like they came for Patrick, but I'm not going to make it easy for them." It was a declaration of war against an invisible, all-powerful force. Margaret, her heart a cold knot of dread, desperately tried to dismiss her son's fears, rationalizing them as a symptom of grief, a product of an overactive imagination. But deep in her very soul, she felt the cold, undeniable touch of terror. She knew, she felt the inexorable pull of the curse, the chilling certainty that her second son, like her first, was marked. The insidious nature of the blood contracts, once a distant, terrifying whisper, was now a chilling reality, tightening its noose around her own flesh and blood. The corporate pact demanded its due, and Thomas, defiant to the last, stood ready to meet his predetermined fate. The night before Thomas's 21st birthday, a night Margaret Murphy knew, with a certainty that froze her blood, was his last, she knelt. She knelt before the small shrine she had meticulously built in her bedroom, a desperate bastion of hope against a predetermined fate. Surrounded by the flickering, dancing light of candles and the cool comfort of rosary beads clutched in trembling hands, she prayed. She prayed with a raw, visceral desperation that bordered on madness, a mother's anguished plea against an unseen, unstoppable enemy. But some prayers, she would soon learn, are answered in ways that bring no comfort, only deeper mysteries, only a more profound, soul-shattering grief. The dawn of Thomas Murphy's 21st birthday arrived, not with the clear light of a new day, but shrouded in an oppressive, unnatural embrace. A fog, so thick, so dense, that the very mountains surrounding Milfield, the constant familiar sentinels of their existence, completely disappeared. The town itself felt isolated, vulnerable, cut off from the outside world, suspended in an ocean of grey mist like a ship adrift, lost in an unknowable void. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was a physical manifestation of the curse, a deliberate obscuring of the world as Thomas stepped into the inevitable. The fog was a shroud, a final chilling curtain drawing around the scene where a life, preordained to end, would finally meet its terrifying appointment. Thomas Murphy, despite the crushing weight of his inherited doom, had made meticulous preparations for his 21st birthday. He had researched, he had questioned, he had armed himself, not just with a pistol, but with a desperate, defiant knowledge of the enemy. But no amount of planning, no amount of foresight, no measure of preparation could have shielded him from the precise, terrifying chain of events that would unfold on that fog-shrouded morning of March 22nd, 1873. Fate, it seemed, had a unique appointment for every Murphy son. Unlike his brother Patrick, who had met his end in the familiar, suffocating darkness of the mine shafts, Thomas's death would occur in the harsh, unforgiving glare of broad daylight. It would be witnessed by dozens of people, their minds forever scarred by the impossible spectacle. Yet, despite the multitude of witnesses, despite the clarity of the morning light, his demise would remain just as inexplicable, just as profoundly disturbing, as his brother's silent, subterranean passing. The curse, it seemed, was not confined to the shadows. It moved in plain sight, adapting its methods, its chilling precision, to the very circumstances of its victims. It reveled in the public display of its power, ensuring that its dark legacy was etched not just into family records, but into the terrified consciousness of an entire community. The ultimate demonstration of a hidden agenda, asserting its absolute control over life and death. The stage was set, and the final terrible act of Thomas Murphy's life was about to begin.